Hello, and welcome to episode 165 of Pop Culturally Deprived, where each week we watch a movie I've never seen before, which is most of them, and talk about the good, the bad, and the Rosebud. This week we're going to be talking about Citizen Kane on your I'm Still Hungry podcast. I'm Mandy Kay, and you can find me on Twitter at Mandy Kay.
And I'm Matthew Vose. I'm on Twitter as @MatthewVose. We are continuing our Cult Popturely Deprived fortnight. We are joined by Richard from the Cult Popture podcast. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And you can find me on Twitter at Cult Popture. Although most of the time it isn't me tweeting, it's my co-host AJ, who you had last week.
Absolutely. Do you ever get confused? Something comes out like, did I say that?
No, we get quite often. We'll get. It probably happens more the other way around on the occasions that I will actually tweet, and we'll get all these replies, and AJ will be like, "What the?" There's been a few times when one of us has tweeted something the other person doesn't agree with, like
Really?
and then like because I wasn't a fan of The Last Jedi, but AJ was, and then he tweeted some defense of it. And Ryan Johnson liked it, and I'm like, ugh.
I didn't ask AJ this, but I have to ask you, do you ever get tongue-tied saying Cult Popture?
I get tongue-tied saying pop culture. I say Cult Popture so much more frequently. But that's the one that I go to. Although there's been a few times when we've like guest starred on other people's podcasts and things like that, and they've like in the title of the episode it says featuring Richard from Pop Culture.
Oh no!
Just all of pop culture.
Yeah. Which I mean, technically is true. I mean, if you consider podcasts to be pop culture, then I'm part of it. So
there you go.
Guys.
Yep.
I did have to think through saying Cult Popturely Deprived because it feels like obviously alien, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Citizen Kane, almost the oldest film we've done. We did do the original animated Snow White a good while ago, but that's still standing as the oldest. But this is, one of the great classics that everyone talks about. We have film cinephiles talk about. When did you first see this?
I saw this must have been like 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like when in my first couple of years out of high school. So I finished high school in 2010. And my first couple of years out of that was like when I really got into cinema, into movies. And that was probably when I watched Citizen Kane for the first time. I've seen it a couple of times, I think. And yeah, it's a good movie.
Did it resonate at the time? Were you doing the...
yeah, I think it was definitely... Because, you check it out because it's the greatest movie of all time. And... It's while it might not be my favorite movie or even one of my favorite movies, it is like the kind of thing you can definitely watch and acknowledge that not only was this groundbreaking in 1941, but it still holds the test of time. And I'm sure we'll get more onto that kind of stuff later on.
Yeah, I came to it a few years ago as well, and I think had I seen this when I was in formative teen years getting into films, if I'd seen this instead of 2001, this would be up there. Instead of that one. So,
Interesting.
So no expectations or Mandy, what is this about? What did you expect it to be about?
So my brief synopsis I actually took from a piece of the Wikipedia article, I think. It is the epic tale of a publishing tycoon's rise and fall. Okay. Which is broadly what it's about. I mean, we can get more nuanced. Yeah. I really had no idea what it was about. Okay. I knew I had been spoiled many years ago that Rosebud was the sled.
Right.
But I didn't know what that meant. Until I started watching it, of course. And then I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I didn't know it was about a publishing person. I didn't know that it was following the life of a man who had died. Like, I had no expectation other than this is a really old movie that everybody says is the best movie ever.
Right.
So.
how were you spoiled? How did you find that out?
I don't even know. I've known that for years.
Is it just pop culture osmosis?
I think so. Yeah, it's just one of those things. Joseph didn't know that, and he asked me what it was about and what it meant, what Rosebud meant, and I was like, I don't know what it means. It's just I've heard the phrase Rosebud was the sled.
Okay.
Right? That's just a thing. So I didn't have any expectations going into it. I actually kind of thought I wasn't going to like it, but I should have known better given our track record with the older black and white movies that we've done on the show so far. I don't think we've had one yet that I've not liked.
No.
I mean, they stand the test of time for a reason. I think is why we're still watching them like 100 years later.
Loads and loads of like shitty films that came out in 1941. But there's a reason we're not talking about them here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
When I saw it, I knew what Rosebud was as well.
Okay.
Because of an episode of Columbo, where the guy, the killer, trains his dogs to savage people when he says a certain word, and he's a huge film fan. So Rosebud is the word. And Columbo retrains his dogs so that they come and give you cuddles instead of attack you when he hears the word, so that he can fool him in the end.
That old Columbo.
Brilliant. In an episode that I looked up that also stars Kim Cattrall.
Wow.
Interesting. All right.
One more question. Just before the screams, were you swimming on top of the water or were you swimming under the water?
I was diving. Swimming under the water.
So you couldn't have heard the phone ring up in the house.
I didn't hear any phone.
Very good.
Do we need to cover why you've not seen it then?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's the same reason it always is. It's before your time.
Yes. Wait, you still have that graphic of where I said I don't like black and white movies, right?
Oh yeah, probably we need to dig that one out as well.
Yeah, just dig that out.
If anyone hasn't seen it, Citizen Kane is a 1941 drama. It was directed by Orson Welles and starring Orson Welles. The film was written by Welles and Herman J. Mankiewicz. It also stars Joseph Cotton, Dorothy Cummingore, and William Alland, amongst others. Orson Welles had found success with his Mercury Theatre and a radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds. A contract with RKO Pictures brought him to Hollywood, where he was allowed to develop his own story, using his own cast and his own crew. Basing the story on the lives of several tycoons and media moguls, the film courted controversy at a number of stages. It included being prohibited from mention in William Randolph Hearst's papers, so the person it was most directly based on. And it was almost not released by RKO due to some of the pressure from Hearst and others, until Welles threatened to sue them if they didn't actually release his film. Whilst the film was a critical success, it did not recoup its costs at the box office, in part due to the efforts of Hearst and others to diminish the film. It disappeared from public view until 15 years later, when it was given a revival in America through TV and cinematic re-release, and was then again heralded by the critics. In the Academy Awards, Citizen Kane was nominated for 9 categories and expected to win the majority of those. In the end, it won just one award, Best Original Screenplay. It was in the first set of films selected for preservation in the National Film Registry list in 1989.
Thank you very much.
It's okay. A story. It's another one of those, because it's a great classic film. We found this with like The Godfather and so on. Yeah. There's a lot written on this. You can find out every single little bit about the making of it and what the cameras were, and let's cover the broad strokes. Yeah.
Good job condensing it.
Yeah.
So like the production of this film is insane, because it was Orson Welles was like 25 at the time and already a huge name in pop culture. Like, he dominated Broadway, the famous War of the Worlds broadcast. And then he just got given, like, Hollywood essentially came to him and we were like, just make whatever you want. And he managed to make a deal where it was like, if you can keep the budget under a certain amount, you can have final cut on the picture, which is like, some of the biggest directors working today still don't get final cut, which means, they get say the studio can't come in and cut everything out. But and so you know, we left this with this kind of like, you know, what's considered the greatest movie of all time, and it comes from like an experiment that never happens, that you know, pretty much never happened again.
It's just crazy. Like you can see the stuff from this that people took away. That we'll dig into about like how they made it and the makeup and so on. But there's still this lack of, you know, the studios want control over it. That they're not going to give away as much to risk as this had. And maybe it's because they don't care about the critical success. Who knows? How were you able to watch this film? Do you own this now?
Yeah, I've got this on DVD. That's how I watched it the first time. Watched it this time.
Nice. I'm the same, and I looked to see if it was rentable over here or anywhere. The main place it's rentable from is Microsoft, on the Microsoft Store, and then you can buy it digitally in a few other places.
Interesting. It is available to rent everywhere here in the States. I rented it the 70th anniversary edition on Amazon. I don't know that it was any different. Like, it didn't seem to have any special bits. Maybe it was just digitally remastered or something?
Yeah, I think they did a remaster on Blu-ray for the 70th.
Nice. So, Orson Welles, yeah, a big name. Mandy, have you ever seen anything from him? Do you know him?
I know his name.
Okay.
And I am familiar with the legend of the panic caused by War of the Worlds. That apparently was possibly exaggerated, maybe?
Yeah.
Don't know. So, but that's, when I hear Orson Welles, that's what I think of.
Okay.
Yeah.
A little hard at times to compare this to other films because it's invented a lot of what it does and, you know, is heralded as being better than anything else ever. What's your experience of something that may be a period piece? It's got a puzzle at its center. It's non-linear.
It's really oddly specific.
See, I didn't think it was, because this is...
Well, I mean, I'm assuming you might be maybe referencing Knives Out that we just talked about last week.
It has elements of Knives Out. It is there,
yeah.
But it's this thing that this is something people try to copy. I mean, Tarantino does this in half his films. Pulp Fiction, obviously, is a pretty direct version of this. You know, Rashomon does bits of it. Vanilla Sky, Memento.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's fair.
I've
of those I've only seen Memento, and Pulp Fiction. But I don't think I would have said Pulp Fiction because I don't view Pulp Fiction as having a puzzle at the center. It is very non-linear, but I don't see the puzzle aspect there.
That's fair. Okay. Citizen Kane, did you enjoy it?
I did.
Okay.
Surprisingly.
You didn't think you would?
I did not think I would. I will learn one of these days that these movies that are good, that everybody says are good, still 70, 80 years later, actually are.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. What did you enjoy? Why did this appeal to you?
It's... What's the best way to say this? Every time we talk about why I go to story, it's about being emotionally invested in a character in the world, not necessarily in the plot. And that's what this movie is. It is the story of Charles Foster Kane.
Okay.
Told from various perspectives, but we essentially get his life from childhood to death, at least broad highlights of it. And that's what I enjoy when I go to a fictional world. I want to live in the world and not necessarily be constantly concerned with whodunit or, trying to figure out the next piece. Does that make sense at all? You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
It does. Knowing that you love to watch a film and try to guess what's the twist, what's coming, this kind of thing.
Sure.
Did it therefore help knowing what Rosebud was? That you didn't have to think about it? You could just enjoy the story as presented to you?
Maybe. I might have been very frustrated if I didn't know what Rosebud was, because all we got of Rosebud in the movie was the reporter asking what Rosebud is, and nobody knew. Nobody had any idea. And so it was just kind of this ethereal idea floating around. And I probably would have like laser focused in on it, trying to figure out if there was a specific clue in the way somebody's talking or the way dialogue was written or why this chair is over here. You know, I probably, honestly, I would have done that. So it probably is good that I knew, so I just didn't have to think about it. And it made me realize pretty upfront kind of why I thought he said it and like why that was really the point of the movie, which just allowed me to enjoy the story for what it was.
Nice.
So it's refreshing to just enjoy something without looking for the twist.
Yeah, that's fair.
And coming on the heels of Knives Out, I think I needed that.
Which doesn't, like, it gives you so much that we talked all about Knives Out last week, but it, you know, that gives you all of it so early on. Mm-hmm. And then I think, like we said, it becomes you're rooting for the characters. This is just interesting because Rosebud isn't important. It's almost an easy way for them to give that thing of he misses his childhood, the freedom he had the last time he was happy, however you read it.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also have this other thing that as much as it's about him, it's about the characters telling the stories, which I love. It's like characters within characters.
Mm-hmm.
Richard, the same sort of questions to you. Obviously, when you first saw this and looking back on it, why did you like this so much? Why did it appeal to you?
So actually, I'll tell you. I used to have. I think this is where it was, but it was like I had this board game that had a DVD in it called Seen It, and it was like
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was from this or some version of a game like that, and there was a scene in it from Citizen Kane. And that was when, because obviously, you hear Citizen Kane's the greatest movie ever made, but you think, it's not going to stand up kind of thing. And they played this scene from it, and it's when Thatcher's coming to see him about his newspaper losing money. And he says, that's right, I did lose $1 million this year. On the rate I'm going, I'll lose $1 million this year, and next year as well. At the rate of $1 million a year, I'll have to close this place in 60 years. And he gives this like little smirk, and it's a very charming and well performed scene. And so that was when I was like, oh, maybe there is something to this Citizen Kane. And so I found a copy of it, bought it on DVD, and watched it. And I think, the sort of the craft of the filmmaking. Because especially when you're going back to 1941, a lot of the techniques you see in this film are either pioneered or perfected by this film. I think detractors of the film were trying to say like, it's an encyclopedia of techniques, and it's like, that's why it's one of the reasons it's great. Is that this is like a masterclass in filmmaking. There's I know the technique it like really pioneered was the deep focus, which is having everything in frame and focus. So there's probably my favorite example of it in the film is when Kane's parents are talking about like giving him up, and you can see in the window in the background him playing outside, and everything's in focus, and so like it highlights the distance between them, as well as kind of like it's almost distracting. But in a good way, like it's supposed to. Your eye kind of isn't really supposed to know what to follow. And just the technical craft of it. And I thought I was only going to be able to appreciate it on that level, but then I was treated to a charming lead performance, and just an interesting story, because it's interesting to have. Essentially a biopic that's actually a mystery movie. Like, the whole thing is someone trying to uncover this mystery, but through that we get this genre-bending biopic.
Yeah, I love that it's got all the sort of clever shots and really interesting staging of it. So you're watching it going, oh, this is really interesting. It's really quite meaty what they're doing, and we're seeing these characters through different times and all this sort of thing coming in. And then the film's good.
Yeah.
The actual story of it is good.
Yeah.
You can really dig into it, and you get into those themes. You're talking about, and that's not even something I consider. You see him in the background, you're like, oh, is something going to happen to him or am I supposed to be focusing on what she's doing or what the father's saying? But you're right, he is there getting between the parents even as they're trying to talk. So like they're not in sync, so you get a sense of like why it's not a happy household, not a good place for a boy to be, possibly, and like just in the way he's staged it, you're getting something about the character stuff.
Yeah, which I guess we're kind of used to these days, like, you know, a lot of visually interesting storytelling. But, you know, back in these days, it's like almost everything was just like either a wide shot to show everything or like close-ups if you want to see the face. Obviously, there were more experimental things happening at the time, but this would really, I feel like, expose that to kind of the general public. Or like it became so influential that it was like, you know, whatever. I'm kind of the encyclopedia, as it were.
And then it's grounded in the real world. You know, it's talking about real world events, and it's got less for us now a little bit because we don't quite know who the people they're referencing, like Hearst, that he's so, you know, based on. But at the same time, we have media moguls, we have people who have controlling industries, we have companies like Disney controlling everything. So it's sort of, you know, not too far from where we are anyway.
Oh yeah, I mean, I watched this in like 2010, 2011, and at the time reading about it, people were like, "Oh yeah, it's essentially based on the Donald Trump of that time," and it's like this was before he was president, back when it was like, including a failed political career. But yeah, and so yeah, it's insane to think that like how Hearst essentially, you know, clipped the film's wings, and you know didn't do very well at the Oscars. Lost to, and The Maltese Falcon was nominated that year as well, which is another classic. And then they both lost to a film called How Green Was My Valley, which apparently, by all accounts, is actually pretty good, but didn't deserve to beat Citizen Kane.
What I expected, and I think we had this with Sunset Boulevard, maybe, that there was like one other film that was nominated for everything as well.
Yeah.
And that was the film that got the nominations. It's like it's a clear number 2 past everything else.
Yeah.
I think there was something about Citizen Kane that it was really interesting how, like, in every category it was nominated, something different won.
Oh, so it wasn't like a sweep from another movie.
Yeah, there was no like one film that really stood out just for whatever reason, whether it is, you know, the shoddiness of the voting from the Academy or something. Different things got it. So Rosebud, the sled, is the big thing, and I quite like that it's the opening. It's the opening word that gets said, but there's not even a hint at that moment of what it could be. The snow globe is so tangential to playing in the snow that it doesn't. When you actually see it, it doesn't come there. So the mystery works well in the film itself. Is it just that this is what makes it so good that I was about to ask a question of, does it need that mystery? Would it still be, you know, just as good or even better if it didn't have that as a distraction? But I'm now wondering, like, is it just because it's got so many levels that it's
I think
class as good
like,
as it is?
It's the bow on top of the package. Like you know, this would be, I think, a pretty good, like it'd be a good movie and everything it did for filmmaking. But I think part of me thinks it's Rosebud that you know, made it stand the test of time, because it's almost like a precursor to like memes, that it's this thing that can be repeated. It's one word that represents the entire film, and it's like all three of us knew what it was beforehand, because it's similar to like the It Was Earth All Along at the end of Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, right.
That it's like it's one of these spoilers that has just permeated and bled into pop culture. But yeah, so almost that kind of gives it like a longevity, I think. Yeah,
I don't think you could have it without it, because it makes it so good. I just love that. And I like. Do I like it? At the end, when you see the sled and it says Rosebud and it's all burning and the music comes in, bah, 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 this is Rosebud, could you believe it? Oh my god, it was the sled. I feel like that feels very of its time, but at the same time, like a lesser director might have thought, oh no, perhaps that's too much. And it's really nice that they're like, can you believe it? We're now telling you what the thing was. We made you believe it wasn't going to be found out.
I quite like that they let the audience in on it, but nobody in the movie knows.
Yeah.
I really like that. Particularly, I think, because Rosebud, the idea of Rosebud is essentially the framework with which they're telling the story of Charles Foster Kane, right? The alternative is to just do an actual biopic where start to finish, we get his life told from the perspective of other people who were in his life. And that's just been done so many times. I don't know if it had been done so many times in 1941. Probably it had, because, you know, relatively most stories are linear, right? So I like that Wells came up with this, like you said, like the bow, the ribbon around the package to dress it up and to make you want to kind of stay involved.
Yeah.
Like, because it doesn't really have anything to do with his life, them looking for the meaning of Rosebud. But it was still, it gave us something to, I guess, what am I trying to say? It's the end of a Monday. My brain is fried. I'm sorry.
I think you're absolutely right that it's a framing device, effectively.
Yeah.
It's the fact that he's going and doing interviews, which is why this isn't just a straight... Because the film opens with the factual details about his life. Like, the opening is a newsreel that we would all watch about, you know, someone's obituary that would tell us the stuff about them. So that kind of gives us that grounding. And then we start getting into kind of the rumor and gossip side of it, the opinion side of it, as he interviews all the different people.
Yeah.
And there is, I think, the way I watch it, a sense of not everyone is telling us everything. They're colouring his character by how they're relating it. Of course, his business manager thinks he was this great, you know, giant of the party making wonderful things. He was making him a huge amount of money and ending up as director of the board.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, he would give him a very, very good credit. But then his ex-wife would talk about how badly he treated her and the scandalous affair, but at the same time not making it seem like it was as terrible as perhaps it might have been. She protected her child and so on.
Yeah. I also, like, part of me thinks that maybe because the whole film, the reveal of Rosebud is essentially the reveal to the audience that, like, on his deathbed, and despite all he had achieved, he was just thinking about playing in the snow as a kid and the life he could have had. That it's almost like another middle finger to William Randolph Hearst. That it's like, you know, like, you're actually not truly happy and you never will be. Because, you know, through the ideas of the story, because that's kind of what it is, really, is that Kane was never truly as happy as when he was a little boy. And then his life changed forever and he got set on this completely different path.
Well, I don't know. Would you have ever had a happy moment if you lived with the knowledge that your parents just gave you to a bank?
I
mean,
yeah, maybe.
Like, that has to be like that would scar me for life.
Yeah, you're right.
I do love the whole bit with the parents because, like, the father is clearly not a good person, and you know, whether it's a sort of old daddy issues thing of he's jealous of his son because his son comes across as intelligent and capable, something on those lines.
Yeah.
But they never quite explain why the mother is doing this, whether she's, you know, he's better off being sent away, or we just need the money, or, again, a different film might have been like, oh, we need her to give a speech at some point about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of implied that, she's getting him away from the father.
Yeah, she had that one line where he said that he ought to thrash the boy, and she said, and that's why I don't want him to stay here, or something like that. But that was it. Just, they came into money, but suddenly she wants him to take the money somewhere else and be raised somewhere else, which is kind of odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It gives her a lot of character, I think. which is good because she's barely in the film, but she's clearly an important part of it because of what the film sets up there. And yeah, I just love the thing of going and talking to all the different people and getting all the interviews done. The one that is coming to mind and wanting to talk about is the ex-wife opera singer.
Yeah.
Because in some ways that's the most factual of the accounts, because it's talking about her being trained and not being well received, and you know, obviously she talks about trying to kill herself and the failure of the marriage. But at the same time, the way it's told is it's always him pushing her. So is there an aspect of she can't admit her failure, that she wasn't as good as she wanted, that she did want it, and he pushed her for some reason? Or
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
I don't know that I may be just taking things for face value, but I accepted what she said about him just because his personality was consistent across all of the accounts.
Okay.
I feel like. Granted, his personality changed as he got older. And I think Leland had a great line that kind of accounts for that in the middle when the Inquirer poaches all of the newspapermen from the Chronicle. Leland says something like, you know, it worries me that little by little they're going to change him without him even knowing it. Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel like that was setting up what we're going to see from him for the rest of the movie and the rest of his life. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just kind of how I was feeling about it. I think they did show him being pretty consistent. He was always very exuberant, very much, I'm going to do things my way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, even when we were first introduced to him as an adult, when he decides he wants the newspaper, right? I think it would be fun to run a newspaper. I don't care about any of this other stuff. And then he moves into the newspaper the first day he's there, right? Like, he never cared what anybody else wanted. He never asked what anybody else wanted. He just kind of bulldozed ahead. And so that's why I believe Susan when she says that's how he was about her.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the good shift of he starts off in the newspaper wanting to help the poor man on the street. And ends up to a place of they will believe what I tell them to believe. I don't, you know, it's never quite as linearly said as that, but it's, you know, that sort of shift. But even in those early stages, he is very much like, if we make the headline big, it will make the news big. He's not actually interested in the truth of the thing. He just wants to be the best at it. And it becomes his hubris throughout, which is always a good character story. It's always an interesting thing to see someone, what is it, run through with their own petard? Something. You mentioning, Mandy, there about him moving into the newspaper reminds me of like the comedy of them showing up and shuffling their things through and the guy carrying all the stuff falling through the door. As much as, you know, there is this great stuff in here that changed the way cinema was made in years hence. There's still stuff of its time, sort of slight screwball comedy kind of, he's tripped over the rug and...
Yeah, it's a surprisingly like funny and charming movie. Because if you got this, you see Citizen Kane, often considered the greatest movie of all time, and what do we say? It's the epic tale of a publishing tycoon's rise and fall. You know, you'd be like, oh, boring, but
right,
that doesn't sound interesting at all. But it's the I think Orson Welles is like you know one of the most charismatic people to have ever existed in Hollywood. And I mean, obviously, if you look later into his career, it's kind of he gets kind of weird and self-indulgent and whatnot. But there was a period for a very long time there where he was, you know, a god among men, all things considered, and And this movie tells you why, that he was able to achieve this monumental feat at like 25.
And pulls off a really good performance at the core of it.
Yeah. It's interesting, that's the same age as Kane was when he inherited his trust fund and started at the newspaper. He was 25.
Nice. And yeah, charming is absolutely the right word for it, because it is just, these moments come up, and there's a lot of one-liners through it. Like I was looking back trying to think on, what were the lines that really stood out, or the bits of dialogue, and there's nothing that I could say like this line. That's not true. There are a few, but most of them are sort of, it's when they're in context, and it's his sort of wry side of like you say, and I'll lose money for 60 years.
Yeah.
It's in the moment that it works so well, and just all the bits about, I think we're all like a jigsaw puzzle, and
and it's his like restrained glee at these kind of things as well. That it's you can see why he had all these relationships he had in his life as well. That like just because people would gravitate towards someone like this.
Mm. So I think we're fairly gushing about it at this stage, because it is good. I mean, like, it wasn't heralded as the greatest film. Critics loved it, but then I know over time, so often other films are voted as kind of number one, and this gets a number two. But it's always been up there. It's never fallen down.
Yeah, the official like the Sight and Sound greatest film of all time list, which is published once a decade, is from 1962 to 2002. This was number one, and then and so that's like polling critics and directors and whatnot. So that's kind of where its status as the greatest film of all time comes from. But it's in 2012 they just randomly decided, actually it's Vertigo and Citizen Kane is number two. Which is weird that it's not like a new film that came out. It's like, people just collectively decided, actually, you know what? Like, it's Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock. And so I mean, I guess there'll be another poll in like 2 years. But I mean, yeah, there's plenty of lists where it's not at number one, and like you look at IMDb ratings, it's like somewhere in the 60s, and Shawshank Redemption's number one.
I feel like the cynicism of the times, this will probably get back to number one.
Oh yeah, totally.
Especially the stuff about kind of the fake news aspect, and whether the media is trustworthy and whether politicians are trustworthy.
Oh yeah, it's insane how timely it is. Almost 80 years later.
Right. So good. But in gushing, because there are one or two good things we can talk about this. Mandy, do you have things that stood out from your one view that went, okay, this is pretty good. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah. I really liked Orson Welles' like performance of Charles Foster Kane. I didn't know that's who it was. Like, it was somewhere right after he started at the newspaper, when I was recognizing just how charming and vivacious he was, that I was like, I really like this character. Who is playing him? Right? Because he just seemed so classically 1940s. And so I looked it up, and it was Orson Welles, and I was very surprised by that. Because, like I said, my only experience with him was War of the Worlds. I knew he was a writer. I didn't know he was an actor or director, actually, at that point. So just his performance, I thought, was spectacular. And to watch him go from, a 25-year-old to, dying of old age, essentially, was pretty spectacular. He just kind of ran the gamut of emotion and experience through it, and I really enjoyed it. As part of my really deeply intense love of Charles Foster Kane as a younger man, I really liked his Declaration of Principles that he wrote, because at that point in his life, he was still very idealistic. He had a purpose, and he wanted to change the world. And he thought that having the money that he had would make him able to do that, and didn't count on the money changing him as he went through life. But as someone who is also often told I'm too optimistic about life, I really related to this Declaration of Principles, I guess. The breakfast montage with him and his first wife, Emily.
Oh, well.
It was wonderfully done. And the moment that I just absolutely laughed in delight was when Emily had the smirk and the audacity to hold up the Chronicle that she was reading at the breakfast table. I loved it. It was just such a subtle moment, but it was hilarious.
Yeah, if we're talking things that hadn't been done before, there were not films like this before in general, and telling stories out of order, but taking a scene just to show the progress of time and the progress of relationship line by line by line. Like, it's so good. It's so good to just keep the audience with it. You know, we're comfortable watching time travel movies and dealing with all in parallel people meeting and all this kind of thing that happens in stories now. But this wasn't a done thing at that time. Like,
yeah,
I don't know what the reaction would have been to it, but it does keep you going with it. You sort of see exactly what's happening and what you're being shown.
I think I read that breakfast montage was the first thing they shot
really?
For the movie too.
Right.
Yeah. So, and then I think my favorite line from the movie is just because it's kind of profound. Is when they realize they're not going to find out what Rosebud means. I can't remember who said it. It might have been the reporter. But he said, "I don't think any word can explain a man's life." And for him to finally come to that realization after spending all of this time trying to figure out what this meant and how, I mean, I think the directive he was given at the beginning was, what did he say at the newsreel? He was like, this tells us like what the man's life was, but it doesn't tell us who the man is. Like, and so he sent him out to find out what his last words meant. And so to kind of come full circle at the end and say, this single word can't explain a man's life, I thought was brilliant.
And it's true. Like, if he got the answer, certainly early on, that it's like, oh, Rosebud, that's his sled from when he was a boy. It doesn't tell you anything, but when you see it in context of a person's life, you're like, okay, so it's talking about how he changed over time, and the last time he was happy or without money or free, or, you know, how we're defining it. Like, yeah, the word doesn't mean that, but they've built it into this concept that works so well.
Right.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So good. Richard, what stayed with you since watching it?
Yeah, well, one thing that there's the speech when he's running for governor, and it's like in front of the giant poster of his head with Kane written at the top, and it's funny watching scenes like that is like that's so iconic in pop culture. It's, you know, one of the you know, top 100 most iconic scenes of all time, probably. And seeing things like this that, you know, when you first watch them, you might not even realize that The Simpsons was referencing something when you saw that. But like that, and then you see it and you go, oh no, okay, I get why this has stayed in pop culture for 70, 80 years. But yeah, I just like you, Mandy. I just love young Kane, just like this charming young go-getter who you know, has the world as his oyster, essentially. It's just a fun character to watch, and he's clearly so joyful in his performance of it that it's fun to watch. Not only the character, but also the actor portraying him, just enjoying it so much.
Yeah,
and you can't help but picture him without that, with the wry grin. Yeah. I'm going to rule the world. Sort of.
What about you, Matthew?
Well, I was just going to say on the speech he gives when he's trying to go for governor with the Kane thing behind him. I think I'd seen that. I think I had seen that on some clip show or you know, something about great movie moments, something like that. Yeah. And I remember going, oh, it's about someone running for office, political career, something like that, something fairly highbrow, and had been put off by it. So when watching it finally and going like, oh, it's about his whole life and the career of this guy, like, okay, maybe it's not quite as you know, in depth, speechy as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think that's the cover of my DVD actually as well. Is that
okay?
Shot. Yeah.
I think mine is him as the 25-year-old, but like with the paper behind him. But the newspaper is then articles about how good the film is.
Oh yeah.
Like because I think it's one of the special editions or something. It's a little meta. I just want to talk about the aging stuff.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Every time I watch it, I'm like, no, this isn't the same actor. This is someone different. This is Like, you know, obviously on him, and he's the one you see most in different ages and so on, but the stuff they do with Leland, the stuff they do with the I can't even remember the guy's name. The bank dude.
Thatcher.
Yeah. Like,
and Bernstein.
You know, they give good performances as older people. You know, and Leland particularly, he gets a lot of fun stuff of being crotchety and wanting a cigar and so on. But the way you see them physically change as well as what the performance is. And, like, you know, I've read up on it, and it's all... They had to invent techniques for this, and they spent 12 hours getting into makeup for a 10-minute shot and stuff. Like, it's worth it. It's that good. It's so impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not even just good for the time. It's like, it's incredible.
Yeah. When I think of, like, Star Trek, where, you know, someone in old person makeup is like their face is sloughing off or something.
Yeah.
Like, they've actually gone, what would this person look like when they're older? It's hints and touches of age. It's not just every bit of wrinkle and grey hair and liver spots and, you know.
Yeah. I first noticed it with Susan, his ex-wife. Because not only did they age her up, but they also made her look like someone who had been crying of grief. Right? She had the puffy eyes, and it just, like, that's the first time I noticed, like, the makeup in this movie was spectacular.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that takes some doing. That's so good.
Yeah.
I also, I did find a Star Trek connection.
Oh, yeah.
I found a way to link Citizen Kane to Star Trek. The editor of this was Robert Wise, who directed Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Huh. I mean, he did a few other things, in like West Side Story and so on.
Right.
But it just came up at the end this time. I'm like, oh, I know that name. I wonder.
Yeah.
See, everything's linked to Star Trek, frankly.
Of course. One thing we didn't talk about, did either of you guys know that, well, I'm sure you do, you have the DVDs, but this movie had a trailer?
Yeah. Yeah, the trailer's really interesting, actually. The trailer has its own Wikipedia page. Yeah.
Does it?
Really?
Yeah, so I was trying to convince Joseph to watch this movie with me, and so I was like, I wonder if there's a trailer, which I wasn't expecting to find anything or to find something that somebody had made so much later, and I found the official one from 1941, and I played it, and I was like, this is interesting. And then when the movie started, and it started with the newsreel about his death, and that was very, like, documentary-like, I was very confused about whether or not this was actually going to be a movie, like a motion picture movie, instead of some sort of narrative documentary.
So what is the trailer?
The trailer is Orson Welles talking about this movie that the Mercury Theater is getting ready to put out and introducing the actors. And it's really nothing about the movie at all.
It's one of the first trailers, I think, that has nothing from the actual movie in it. And it contains the only behind-the-scenes footage that exists of the movie as well.
Really interesting.
But it's essentially... And because this was part of his, like, final cut, this was how he decided to sell the movie. But part of the reason they did it like this was to hide what the movie was about, so that Hearst wouldn't be able to, like, stop the release of it. And, like, they almost did, but it was like, part of it was to surround it in a bit of secrecy.
Nice.
Yeah.
Because I did see stuff about, like, gossip columnists sneaking into preview screenings to find out what it's about, whether they should write about it and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, they tried to control the narrative.
It's crazy that this kind of stuff existed in 1941. Like, because I guess, like, you know, when we think back to these times, it's like, oh yeah, only like 8 movies came out that year.
Yeah.
But, they still had reviewers and spoilers they had to worry about and things like that. And yeah, it's quite funny to think about.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
All right. Well, is there anything else that we need to discuss about Citizen Kane?
One thing I'd like to bring up, just briefly, is one of my favorite directors, David Fincher, is coming out with his first movie in like 6 years, coming out this year on Netflix. It's called Mank. It's a biopic of Herman J. Mankiewicz, who wrote Citizen Kane. And so it's interesting as well, because it was David Fincher's father wrote the script for it, and like it's the only script he ever wrote. He wrote it in like the early 2000s, and then he died like 10 years ago or something. And so he's using the script that his father left behind, and Gary Oldman's playing Mank. So yeah, just keep an eye out for that if you'd like. Probably be some interesting behind the scenes stuff on Citizen Kane. But the other really exciting thing about it is Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross are doing the score, and so they're known for doing like lots of synth and stuff like that. They've got a very sort of not necessarily unique, but they've got a very well defined sound and style. But they're doing the score for this using only period appropriate instruments.
Oh, what fun!
Yeah,
Oh.
so it's all the like what they would have had access to make a score out of in 1941. So excited to hear what their sound sounds like through that.
Cool. I will definitely look for that.
Yeah, because the thing I was wondering, as we were talking, particularly the mention of Vertigo, like there was a lot about Citizen Kane. There are films about the making of it and the people on it and books written and analysis and all sorts. It's never been remade. There's not a 1992 TV miniseries.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas like there are Psycho jumps to mind. There is a shot for shot remake of Psycho with Vince Vaughn.
Yeah.
Which tells you a lot about it. But why is this? I mean, is it just that someone owns it who is not going to let people get their claws into it, or?
Well, I think that's part of it. I know that with Psycho, that was kind of Gus Van Sant's experiment. Like when asked why he made the remake and why do it shot for shot, he said, so no one else would. And I think it's an interesting experiment in like in what is directing, really, because you have Psycho's obviously made by one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, and Gus Van Sant's a great filmmaker, but it's like even if you are copying every single shot from the film, like why isn't it as good? And it's like obviously the performances aren't as good, but like how much is it about like creating a sense of atmosphere, and where does the atmosphere come from if not the shots and the order you put them in and how long they last and things like that. So it like the Psycho remake, as like misguided as it is, it's a really interesting thing that it exists. But I think Citizen Kane's probably just one of those untouchable things. It's like you'd have to be a fool to try and remake Citizen Kane.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, Hollywood.
Yeah, Hollywood.
that's the issue with it. But no, yeah, it just I'd never really thought about it because it's on this pedestal. It's like Citizen Kane. It stands as it is. But there are other good films that have been attempted again.
Yeah, but I mean, like, because Citizen Kane is like synonymous with being the best. Like you talk about, you often hear people talk about like something being the Citizen Kane of XYZ.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great. Right, I think we're done.
Okay. Well, if you would like to join the conversation, you can use the hashtag PCDeprived on Twitter. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Eloquent Gushing, or you can send an email to podcast@eloquentgushing.com.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
I'm so pleased we've hit like a properly good classic film as well.
Yeah. It feels like
as soon as I saw on the list,
yeah, especially with with the log line of your podcast, you need to do Citizen Kane. It took you 165 goes, but you got there in the end.
We got to it eventually.
Yeah. Is there anything else you think we should seek out? Whether a classic, a new film, something else that you would say to find?
Oh, you could check out some of Orson Welles' other work. His last film role was he played Unicron in Transformers the movie. So there's that. The Third Man is another. It's. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything about it, but the Third Man is a good film featuring Orson Welles, and the way he appears in it is quite cool.
Okay.
Terrific. And where can people find your show? Do you want to give us the elevator pitch for
all right.
Cult Popture?
My podcast is called Cult Popture. I co-host it with AJ, who check out last week's episode to listen to him talking about Knives Out. So our podcast, we do a series called Film Franchise Fortnights, where every 2 weeks we watch all of and then discuss a different film franchise. We've just finished doing all the James Bond movies. We split it over fortnights by the actor. So go listen to that, unless you're like a big fan of James Bond, because I am not. Like up until Daniel Craig, I really did not like those movies. Aside from the odd one that was all right, but we do a massive wide variety of things. We've done a bunch of different horror movie franchises, and then we've also done like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and its sequel.
Amazing.
And then on our
and apparently Airbud.
Yeah, Airbud, that's another. All like 19 movies in the Airbud franchise. So and then when we're not doing those, we release a podcast every week. So if it's not Film Franchise Fortnights, we do another kind of discussion or some kind of thing to do with pop culture. Although our most recent episode, at time of recording anyway, was a very self-indulgent quiz where we got our fans to send in questions about ourselves.
But you did literally call it the self-indulgent quiz. You knew what you were doing.
So we made it. It's not pretentious if we acknowledge that it is.
No, it's good. It's good fun. I love your show. I've recommended it many times, and just the amount of stuff you have to watch sometimes, but the range of things that you cover, where you do flip-flop from we're covering Lord of the Rings or the MCU or James Bond, and now it's Land Before Time, Sister of the Traveling Pants. Yeah. Godzilla.
It's like quality Whiplash. And the thing we get is like when we watch a series of 10 horror movies, and then because they're chosen randomly or decided by our patrons, and then the next week we get another horror movie, and then so for over a month you're just watching people die, and it's so depressing, and you just get in such a dark headspace just having to, because it's you're supposed to feel a certain way, but you just end up being sad. You're not scared. You're just I don't want to meet all these new characters because they're all gonna die.
Oh no!
I mean, it's a good thing horror franchises don't go on too long, eh? Terrific. Well, I thoroughly recommend everyone go and check them out.
Well, thank you very much.
And we are completely funded by our lovely listeners through Patreon. So anything you give, it gives access to exclusive content, early access to shows, bonus shows, and some exciting physical merch, such as coasters and stickers and magnets. You can find out more by visiting patreon.com/eloquentgushing.
And we will be back next week with another episode where we are going to talk about The King's Speech with Emmy from So You Want to Read Tolkien. Until then, I'm Mandy Kay.
And I run a couple of newspapers. What do you do? Pop Culturally Deprived is an Eloquent Gushing production. For more information, go to eloquentgushing.com or find us on Twitter @eloquentgushing.